There is a strange moment that almost no one admits to. It's when you're alone, completely alone, and suddenly you realize there are two voices inside your head. One speaks, the other answers. And you don't know exactly when the conversation started, but it's been going on for a while, sometimes silently, sometimes in a low voice, as if you were trying to solve something you don't even know what it is. This invisible dialogue is not madness. It's not weakness. It's simply the mind doing what it has always done, trying to find order amidst internal chaos. And anyone who has ever murmured something to themselves in the car, in the kitchen, or while looking in the mirror knows that there is something there that deserves to be observed. If any part of this feels familiar to you, you're not alone. And if you ever feel like sharing your experience, the comments are open. When someone talks to themselves, it's as if they're quietly expressing the confusion that was already screaming inside. The sound of one's own voice has a different weight when no one is listening. It's not performance. It's not explanation. It's simply an attempt to make concrete that which, in silence, seems too abstract to bear, as if words, taking shape in the air, could organize what is disorganized within. Sometimes the mental confusion is so intense that it becomes impossible to just think. You need to listen. Feel the vibration of the voice. See the words coming out as if an external witness were needed, even if that witness is yourself, talking to yourself about yourself. And the strange thing is that in many cases, it works. The simple act of putting a thought into audible words makes it smaller, more manageable, as if the mind needed this small, secret ritual to finally understand what it's trying to tell itself. But there's something else going on behind the scenes. Self-talk begins as a simple mental comment, but quickly turns into a silent debate between different versions of oneself. At first, it's just an observation. I need to do this. I shouldn't have said that. Loose phrases without intention. But then something changes. The phrase generates a response, and that response generates another. And suddenly, without realizing it, you're in the middle of a full-blown argument with yourself, where each side has arguments, different tones, even distinct personalities. Part of you tries to be rational, practical, objective. Another part questions, doubts, brings to the surface fears you'd rather ignore. And there's a third, quieter voice that simply observes all of this happening, as if watching an internal trial where you are simultaneously the defendant and the jury. The most disturbing thing isn't having this debate. It's realizing that it never truly ends. Even when you decide to stop talking, the voices continue, quieter, more subtle, waiting for the next moment of silence to restart the conversation that was never fully resolved. And each version of you is right, and each one is wrong too. Behind every sentence spoken to you, there is a hidden fear that the person doesn't want to admit, not even in thought. When someone whispers, "I can do it," in a low voice, it's rarely just encouragement. It's a response, a defense against something that came before, something the mind doesn't want to name directly, because naming fear is giving it reality. And as long as it remains nameless, it's still possible to pretend it doesn't exist. Self-talk functions like an emotional smokescreen. The words you choose to speak to yourself are carefully selected to hide other, heavier words that lie just below the surface. Everything will be all right is just the acceptable translation of "I'm afraid it won't be." I know what I'm doing is the soft version. of "I have no idea what I'm doing." And the most curious thing is that the mind knows this. It knows it's hiding something from itself. But it continues the game, because sometimes illusion is more comfortable than clarity. Talking to yourself then becomes a way to maintain the balance between what you feel and what you can admit to feeling. But the fear remains. Listening to everything, waiting, talking to yourself is often a secret rehearsal, practicing lines, confrontations, and endings that may never happen. There are conversations that we rehearse hundreds of times in our minds before they happen in real life. And some never happen. They remain there, repeated in a low voice in the shower, in traffic, in bed before sleeping. Each version slightly different, each line adjusted, each argument sharper than the last. This mental rehearsal is more than preparation. It's a way of experiencing things without real risks, saying what you really think without consequences, confronting those who need to be confronted without fear of their reaction. In the inner theater of the mind, you have total control. You know what others are saying. You know when to win. You know when to retreat. But there's a price. The more you rehearse something that never happens, the more the imagined version becomes real in your head. And when the situation finally arrives, it never resembles the rehearsal. People don't say what you imagined. You don't react as you planned. And the perfect script you practiced so many times dissolves into thin air. And then you go back home, and the rehearsal starts again. In the midst of self-delusion, the person changes roles without realizing it. They become the accuser, the defense attorney, and the judge of their own life. There's a strange moment when you realize you're arguing with yourself. A voice accuses you. You were wrong. Again, and before the sentence is finished, another voice responds, defending, justifying, looking for mitigating circumstances. But I tried. The circumstances were difficult. And in the midst of all this, a third presence observes everything, trying to decide which of the two is right. This role reversal happens so quickly, it's almost imperceptible. You go from defendant to lawyer in seconds, from lawyer to judge, from judge back to defendant, and each role has its own voice, its own tone, its own truth. The prosecutor is relentless. The lawyer is desperate. The judge tries to be fair, but is tired of hearing the same case for so long. The problem is that this internal tribunal never reaches a final verdict. The trial drags on. The evidence is reviewed. The sentences are postponed. And you remain there, occupying all the places at once, waiting for an acquittal that may never come because you yourself are the one who needs to grant it. And the jury is divided. It always has been. At certain times, the inner voice becomes so heavy that the person needs to speak aloud just to avoid completely believing it. There are thoughts that gain too much power when they remain only in the head. They echo. They multiply. They grow in silence, as if they were the only possible truth. And the more you try to ignore them, the louder they become, until a point is reached where the only way to break the spell is to put it out there in real words into the air. Speaking aloud transforms thought. It ceases to be an absolute truth and becomes merely a phrase, an opinion, something that can be questioned, tested, heard from the outside, as if the voice itself had the power to deflate the gravity of what was being thought. I'm good for nothing. Sounds different when said aloud. More fragile, more questionable. It's an unconscious strategy for emotional survival. The mind realizes it's drowning in its own narratives and uses the voice as a lifeboat, a way to hear itself from the outside, to gain distance, to realize that what seemed like a final sentence is in fact just a passing moment of pain. But the inner voice never completely gives up. It waits for the next silence. This discrete habit is also a way to organize chaos, to cue up thoughts that, without words, would be nothing but noise. There are days when my head feels like a blur, overlapping information, mixed emotions, urgent tasks competing with old worries, all at once, without order, without hierarchy. And in the midst of this mental chaos, talking to myself acts as a primitive form of organization, as if putting things into words were the same as putting them in drawers. When you say aloud, I need to solve this first, then that, you're not just planning, you're creating structure where there was none. You're transforming a nebula of anxiety into a concrete list. You're giving linearity to what was circular. And somehow, that calms you down, because the human mind prefers clarity, even if it's an invented clarity. It's not about having the right answers. It's about feeling that there's a process, a path, a minimal order in thoughts. Talking to oneself then becomes a cognitive survival tool, a way to avoid getting completely lost in one's own internal confusion, a map drawn in real time with one's own voice serving as a guide. And sometimes that's enough to move on. When someone whispers, "It'll be all right," to themselves, they're almost always trying to drown out another far crueler phrase that came before. There's a voice that arrives first. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait for the right moment. It simply appears, laden with doubts, fear, and bad memories. You're going to fail again. No one will believe in you. You're not good enough. And this voice knows exactly where it hurts. It knows every weakness, every poorly healed scar. The "it will be all right" that follows isn't pure optimism. It's resistance. It's an attempt to create a sonic shield against what has already been said, as if repeating something positive aloud could erase the negative echo that still vibrates inside. But it rarely works completely. The cruel phrase remains there, right below, waiting for the next opening. And the hardest part is realizing that both voices come from the same place. There is no external villain. There is no enemy invading the mind. It's all internal. It's you trying to protect yourself from yourself. It's the part that wants to survive fighting against the part that has already given up. And self-dialogue becomes this invisible battlefield where each positive word must confront 10 negative ones that came before. But still, you keep talking, because giving up on dialogue would be giving up on the fight. Self-talk creates parallel worlds, imaginary conversations, where the person finally says what they keep silent about in real life. There are things that were never said, phrases that remained stuck in your throat for years, answers you should have given, confrontations you should have faced, truths you should have revealed. And since these words found no outlet in the real world, they find an alternative stage. The mind. There, in imaginary conversations, you finally say everything without fear, without consequences. The person who hurt you hears exactly what they deserve to hear. The unfair boss gets the sharp retort you never dared to give. Unrequited love finally understands what you felt, and for a few minutes, in these invented dialogues, you feel a strange sense of justice, of closure, of relief. But when the dialogue ends, reality remains intact. The words weren't really spoken. People didn't hear. Nothing changed. and you're left with this parallel version of a conversation that never happened, but which somehow feels more real than many conversations you've actually had, because in it you were wholesome, courageous, and maybe that's why you keep going back to her again and again. Ultimately, talking to oneself is less about madness and more about survival. It's the mind trying to take care of itself with the resources it has. The truth is, nobody teaches us how to deal with what happens inside our own heads. There's no manual. There's no protocol. So the mind improvises. It creates its own mechanisms, its own strategies, and self-talk is one of them. It's not a sign of collapse. It's a sign that something is still working. When you talk to yourself, you're doing something profoundly human. You're trying to keep up with yourself, to be a witness to yourself, to offer yourself the attention that perhaps no one else is offering at that moment. It's your mind saying, I'm here, I hear you, I know it's difficult. It's a silent act of care, even when it seems strange, even when it seems desperate. It's not perfect. It doesn't solve everything. Sometimes it just complicates things further. But it remains a form of resistance, a refusal to give up on oneself, because as long as there is dialogue, there is someone trying to understand, someone seeking clarity, someone still willing to talk to themselves, about themselves, for themselves. And this, however invisible it may be, is a form of hope. Talking to yourself has never been about being broken. It's always been about being alive enough to try to understand yourself. Every whisper, every internal debate, every imaginary conversation is just the mind doing what it knows how to do, seeking order, clarity, some kind of peace amidst the noise. And there's nothing wrong with that. What goes on inside your head is more common than you imagine. Those voices, those rehearsals, those fears you try to stifle with positive words, all of that is part of being human. It's part of carrying a consciousness that never stops processing, questioning, trying to find meaning, and recognizing that is already an important step. Ultimately, self-talk is just a conversation you have with yourself, because on some level, you know you need to be heard. And that's okay. You're not alone in this. And if this video helped you see something that was hidden, consider subscribing to the channel. There are more insights like this waiting for you.